And we are live.
Awesome.
Hello, Erin.
Hi.
How are how are you doing?
I'm great. How are you? I'm happy to be chatting with you.
I'm doing well, and I'm also happy to be talking with you finally. Um, your title will be displayed on screen, so there's no need to say what's your official title.
Okay.
Um, so I would rather ask you how who is Erin Sarofsky, and not the online persona, but who as a person you are.
Yeah, I think I'm a nurturer. I nurture our clients' needs. I nurture my team's needs. I'm always trying to look out for the best interest of all the people to come up with some kind of compromise that's still something that we would all be proud of and feel a sense of ownership of. Yeah.
Okay. Um, I don't know if you know this, but the way I choose topics for these recordings, they are specifically tailored to each guest.
Okay.
So it's not that I decided, oh, I'm going to talk about this and let's pick somebody randomly like a Russian roulette. Um, Stuff came across me, and then I connect that to people.
Okay.
And so the topic of today will be the ethics of our artistic corpus.
Hmm.
And I will explain a little bit more why that topic,
Okay.
and then we can dig in. So recently, there has been a very controversial rebrand happening online
Yeah.
that we're not going to name per se,
Okay.
and and my feed got like swamped
Hmm.
with such amount of negativity
Hmm.
about it, you know, and despite the fact that you might like what has been done for that rebrand or not, that's totally not the discussion here, um, because that's very subjective and there's a lot of more stuff involved in it.
Hmm.
But what struck me is that you were, I think, the first one after days or a week or weeks. You were the first one to kind of like, you made a video, you recorded where you were asking to like like find middle ground,
Hmm.
and just like give stuff time.
Yeah.
Um, and so why the ethics of our artistic corpus? Because a lot of the people that reacted like so negatively were creatives,
Yeah.
and and um, and that shocked me a little bit. So before like going more granular into why that shocked me, could you kind of like share how do you took that in?
Yeah. So, well, yeah, there was a lot of negativity online about just a teaser that was launched. And, I engaged in some conversation on a few other threads. And I was like, well, I mean, it's still so new. It's so shocking and such like a storied, iconic brand. Um, but iconic doesn't happen overnight. And, um, and I started doing some looking into like what was going on with the brand and what they were doing from a business perspective. And they were transforming from combustion to all electric. They were, moving up in price point for their cars. And I was like, oh, this is really interesting. I mean, I don't know that I love the work, but I don't feel like I've seen the work. So why are we talking shit about it? On top of that, it's been a pretty quiet year work wise. We haven't seen many branding projects come out. We haven't seen really an abundance of work. So I felt like, the creative community just like glommed on and ate itself right there. It's like, wow, first of all, there's no such thing as bad press. The fact that people are talking about it is probably a good thing, even if it isn't necessarily everybody in love with it. Um, but I do think that, you know, we should be celebrating companies that are interested in rebranding and taking really big swings, even if they are a miss. We should be celebrating that because that's hopefully, I mean, if I were given that opportunity to brand part of that or be a part of that team, I would have been psyched, and I would certainly understand how we got to that outcome. And I would know that everybody being critical of it has just seen the tip of the iceberg. So I was just like, okay, let's pump the brakes. Let's learn more about what the brand is doing and let's see this thing roll out. Yeah.
Yeah, the you can I think you summarized already quite a few ideas in which we align,
Yeah.
both of us. Um, what sort of shocked me a little bit in all of this is, and this is a topic that comes like very often in these recordings, is
Mhm.
we are sort of in a culture of outrage,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
and it's so much easier to lash out at something than in fact create something, because that particular project for that particular brand, it's not something that was decided yesterday.
Mhm.
That's a process that took
Yeah.
like at
Yeah.
least a year, but probably
Yeah.
more.
More because the car was developed in conjunction with
Yes.
it, which was
And,
really special, like the fact that they did the car and the brand simultaneously.
and so I was like, in my head, I was thinking, if I was a creative doing something as public as this,
Mhm.
and then fellow creatives, um, kind of like like do this mudslide on me, how would I take? I could take it, and it's really hard, and I didn't felt it was acceptable to behave
Yeah.
like that.
Well, there's like a lot going on. I mean, we are in a critic-based culture now. Like we're all kind of sharing with the world and then baffled by the fact that there's like boom, we're just pounced on immediately. I think that's social media culture. I think unfortunately that's partly why it's so unhealthy. We look to it for validation, and you might see 100 replies that are filled with kindness. As a person, you're going to focus on the one that's like tearing you apart and tearing you down. And so yeah, as an artist, it's probably like incredibly demoralizing, you know. Um, I think even bigger, like brands are really scared to take risks now. When you see backlash like this, like the intensity and the immediacy of it from the community that is should be first to support these big swings. I think, brands have gotten, very close to the chest. Things are happening really fast and really cheap, and they're afraid to go big. And they're afraid to go big in part because of this culture, not just within the creative community, but in the world, you know?
Yeah, I 100% agree, because that's the paradox. As creatives, we want to be doing big projects. We want
Hmm.
to be involved in those big swings. But then if we're not the first ones to support when those things happen, then we cannot complain afterwards that our
Hmm.
clients are kind of like,
Yeah,
you know, tip,
traditional and
tippy
conservative.
toeing
Yeah.
for these kind of things. Because I mean, hats off to that brand to like try something that
Hmm.
bold, honestly,
Hmm.
and to the creative team, because like there's so many parts involved into a process like this, like so many
Hmm.
levels of decision. And this is why I wanted to talk about this with you also, because you are the founder of a studio. um, you work with creatives, and
Hmm.
working with creatives works like means also working with egos.
Oh yeah.
And this whole like outrage and criticism that happened online was linked also to somewhere egos. It's like thinking I know better what's better for this thing, when in fact you don't know 10%, not even 5% of all the
Yeah.
information coming in and out of that process. So I
Yeah.
wanted to know, just to know how in your case, when you're connected to these kind of projects and you
Hmm.
have to handle these sort of like like egos and things and ideas and which fight against each other, how does it go?
Well, typically the higher you go, the less ego there is. I feel like ego happens in like in the spaces where there's a lot of insecurity and fear. So, like the bigger we go on the entertainment side and on the brand side, the more security is in people's jobs, the less ego there is, and there's just more openness and collaboration, you know? And then it really helps when you have people that really understand what they're creating, um, and that create space for other people to be able to um, be additive to the process. Like the best filmmakers are additive. They know, like, oh, I'm going to bring in Erin and her team, and we're going to get amazing titles, or Elastic and their team, or Territory and their team. You know what I mean? They know that they have partners that are going to elevate the work. And that doesn't mean they don't come in with a point of view as a filmmaker, but they know they're going to have the right conversations to get really good outcomes. And they're confident in that. And so when people lack the confidence in themselves and in the process, then that's, I think, when egos take over and politicking and posturing, and you just kind of wind up in that weird place where you're just like, okay, the goal isn't necessarily to do the best work. The goal is to push the business outcome so that people don't get fired. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you just said you nailed it, like now, like when you finish saying maybe we're not doing the best work because
Hmm.
it there's always like a compromise.
Yeah.
You know,
But
there's the vision, but then
yeah.
like, and specifically, for example, for this case, like not only you're talking about something that's virtual, like
Hmm.
branding, but there's like a physical element
Hmm.
which is tied to the realities of, in this case, mechanics,
Hmm.
you know, like physics, a lot of things.
Production. Yeah.
Yeah, production, and that also like plays a big role in the whole connection of things.
Hmm.
Um, is there from the tip of your head any of the recent projects um, that have been as complex or close to complex as this?
Um, that I've worked on, or that
Yeah,
just out
or
in the world.
no,
Yeah.
that you've been involved in.
You know, God, like the pro the project we're talking about out in the world, like the physicality of putting a product like that in the world and connecting the branding to it and like transforming a legacy brand. Like on the brand side, I don't think I've ever been involved in anything that big and transformative. Um, I would love to. So if anybody listening wants to like give me a call for sure, I'll take a swing with you. I'll go big, you know. Um, but but on the entertainment side, yeah, you know, I think about when we did Captain America Winter Soldier, we went really bold and very, very graphic. And I think that while Marvel was used to working with designers, they were used to working with them more through the visual effects lens, you know? And so I think for us, we came in with such a design with a capital D perspective, and really connected the work to graphic novels and, you know, the history and legacy of comic books, and going with a minimal palette because we wanted to, not because we were restricted. We're from a print perspective or anything like that. I think that for us was a really big, bold swing. And, you know, the the team there with Kevin, Lou, and Victoria and the Russos were like, okay. And I think in some ways that really changed their perspective on how design could influence and be a part of the storytelling and the branding as it moved into marketing and things like that.
If you're allowed to, could you share a little bit? Because again, I think a lot of the people that were vocal online, most of them don't know, again, the levels of hierarchy and decision that happen in these kind of projects. And I guess with the one you just
Yeah.
referred to, there's also a lot of like levels of decisions and you know, like, so if you could share a little bit more also like of that part of the business, because now that's like purely business oriented.
Yeah.
It's that part of, because we are service providers in the end, you know,
Hmm.
and as much as we have our creative hearts and everything, we are being hired for something.
Yeah. We don't own the work. Like, actually, at the end of the day, like, our clients own the work. So it really, it's like being an architect and being hired to build a house for somebody, to design and build a house. You have to take into account how many kids there are, how old people are, how the house is going to be sited on the property. Does somebody have a disability in the house? Are they planning on aging in the house? Are there going to be aging parents in the house? Like, what, you need to think much more deeply about the subject than just applying your cool style. You know what I mean? And so I really feel like when we're delivering stuff for people, they have to live in it. So it has to be something they love and something that works for them. And so I just think that's like kind of a perfect metaphor, even though it's architecture, it's just they own it. They have to love it. They have to say, look at this thing I made, even though they just wrote the check, right? They have to feel like they made this. So that exists, like, on every project, the ultimate decision maker is a little bit different, right? The ultimate decider. Um, with main titles, there's, studio executives and directors and writers, and they're usually like a lead person, one amongst them that has to be satisfied. Sometimes there's a little bit of a consensus. But on the brand side, that can be a lot more complicated, you know? And there can be layers and layers to things, especially if you're working with an agency and then that agency has a client that, so you have layers inside the agency that you have to kind of work through, and then you have to get it um, then through to the client side. And sometimes we don't even see how those people are reacting on the client side, and that's being managed completely without you. And sometimes I think that's why direct to client is quite nice, um, because it's just getting closer to the decision maker, to the person living in the house.
Yeah, it's funny because I finished recently recording an episode with PJ from
Yep. Laundry.
Laundry,
That's great.
and we were talking about the sphere
Hmm.
and how um, they started with all these like incredible complex ideas, and
Hmm.
then they started to strip it down more and more and more and
Hmm.
more because the format, because the time people are like, the time is very short, the time you're exposed to it is very short. So in a very
Yep.
short amount of time, it has to be watchable from all sides, and like a lot of the medium like impose a lot of constraints, and and
Hmm.
and I refer to concert visuals equally, because that's the same. You have lights, fireworks, the
Hmm.
band, and your visuals don't have to overshadow all of that. It's
Right.
just like a symphony of all those things together. And and so I guess like the architecture part was like a good analogy, and like you say, it's like all those layers of people you have to connect with.
Hmm.
Um, so you know it's
Yeah.
no, nonetheless, no, even if you rationalize all of that,
Hmm.
um, it's still putting out, it's still putting yourself out there.
Hmm.
Um, as much as we like to dissociate ourselves from the work, saying like, okay, this is business, this is not, if notes arrive, it's not about me, it's just
Hmm.
about the work, and what also is going on the
Right.
client side, and a lot of variables we don't know. So could you also like share a little bit about that?
Yeah. I mean, we're always putting ourselves into our work, and there is vulnerability there. But at the end of the day, like, we have to be professionals. So you kind of, at the end of the day, have to realize when they're being critical of the work, they're not being critical of you. I mean, when you pitch a job, even if you pitch like multiple directions, there's still a lot of directions that are cast aside. And then you're excited because they picked the one and okay, we're going to move forward with the one. But then the whole process is a series of little rejections along the way. You share your work in progress. They focus on what they don't like most of the time. This isn't working. That's not working. And then we solve those problems. And then we show them again. This isn't working. That isn't working. Sometimes you have an effusive client that's like, oh, I love it. I love it. They're very sensitive to the fact that we're sensitive artists. But oftentimes that's just not the case, that people just point out what's not there yet, as if we don't know what's not there yet. Of course we know what's not there yet. We're halfway through the process. Of course it's only 50% of the way there, but their job is to point those things out, and to make sure that we know and that we're on the same page. So it's kind of like death by a million paper cuts. First, you only win one, you lose by a lot. So a 1 of 5 treatments is chosen. Then every review, so let's just say it's 2 a week for 4 weeks. Think of all the little rejections there till ultimately you deliver. And then there's people that are critical of it. Some people love it. Some people don't like it. Ultimately, it just needs time, usually out in the world, for you to know for sure. If it is really good or not good. It's very rarely that initial kind of feedback that is accurate. So,
Yeah, I would connect this with something I hear very often in our creative community.
mm-hmm.
I hear a lot of people saying we have to educate the client.
Yeah.
And I'm mitigated about that expression, because I understand what people mean by saying that. It's like we are the experts in our fields.
Yep.
But again, when we are doing something for a client, it's connected to a lot of other variables that we don't know,
Correct.
we're ignorant of, and if we are professionals, we will try to get as informed as we can about them.
Of course.
But still, some of them will remain invisible to us. And so sometimes, like when a client gives feedback, it comes from a place where they have an experience that we don't. And it's also about being humble in a way, I think. There's been feedback I've hated receiving, but once it was like executed, I came to the realization that it made the product better. Or if it didn't make it better, it like rippled inside of me, going like, okay, maybe that's not as good as I want, but maybe I can do this. It pushed me in other corners where I wouldn't have gone if I wouldn't have had that feedback.
Yeah. It's interesting. Like, I think a lot of people in general, whether they're clients or creative directors, I think nobody's really trained on how to give feedback. As a creative director, I like to give feedback how I was given feedback. The feedback I was most resonated with is how I try and give feedback. And that is, instead of tell somebody to move something over here and push it up and like be very tactical about like directional about what to do to fix a thing, I just merely state what I think needs to change. So, the logo is not as visible as it needs to be, or I'm not feeling like the branding as much. Part of that might be the logo. Take a look at that. So what I've done is I've just kind of given them a problem to solve. You know what I mean? In a way to critically analyze it. So maybe it's just that the logo needs to be bigger, right? But maybe it's just that the background is too busy. Maybe it's the color palette isn't red and white and the brand is Target. Like, why? Like, what's going on there? So I basically given them a lens, a problem to solve. So it's not saying like their work is. It's just saying it's not there yet, and this is what needs to be looked into. So yeah, I like to give a problem to solve so that they understand what I have a problem with. It's not their work that I have a problem with. It's just this thing about it that needs to still have some transformation to it to be right. It's also like a lens for success. Like when I come back and look at it again and I see the brand, I'm like, oh wow, like I might not have done that way, but you have solved the problem, and that gives the artist more freedom to be able to make decisions than if I was prescriptive about it. Um, so that's how I like to handle it. I think, when somebody talks about educating a client when it comes to process, I mean, look, if they're your client and they're hiring you, they've probably done this before. I think it just comes to the aspect of like, they're doing what they know to be the way to have it be. So, um, we're not necessarily in the job of like telling our clients how to talk to us and how to treat us, but there are gentle ways to kind of to let them know how you like to receive feedback and that what works for you in a kind, respectful way. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that our brain is kind of rigged by default to reject change,
Yeah.
sort of. And so our work implies constant change,
Mm-hmm.
um, not only because of like the market, but also like by the real like the nature of the exchanges we have in our work with our clients.
Of course.
And and I think it's part of like it's our role to dig deeper. It's
Mm-hmm.
always like when a client says, "Oh, I don't like this," you can stay
One.
at that level, or
Yeah.
you can start digging. It's like, okay, why don't you like this?
Right.
Well, I don't know. Okay, is it the color? Is it the position? Or is it the image that was just before? And
Mm-hmm.
then and start like trying to understand
Yeah.
what are the like the pillars of their thinking,
Mm-hmm.
and that will, to me, like that gets so much out of the way also. um and it's also what I call like boundaries.
Yeah.
It's like when you get a brief, there's boundaries, and
Mm-hmm.
some of them are like a parent, and some of them you have to read kind of between the lines, do your
Mm-hmm.
research. And I've heard juniors like a lot of time complain like, yeah, I mean, this is so there's so many boundaries, like how can I express myself in here? And I'm like, first of all, not every project is like for you to express yourself,
No.
but then find inside of that project the niche where you will be able to have fun. You like express it. Like
Mm-hmm.
if you cannot touch colors because the colors are what they are, then plunge into the animation part. You
Mm-hmm.
know, I mean, we all know that it's always worst to have like a blank page where
Mm-hmm.
you can go to like any direction and then you get easily lost,
Mm-hmm.
than in fact gets a set of boundaries which like seem restrictive in the beginning, but those can be bent. And
Yeah. Yeah. That comes with age and maturity, I think. But, it also gets into the difference between an artist and a designer. And I think that while design can be artful, and I think art can be design, I do think there is a difference between an artist and a designer. And an artist is someone who does work for themselves, puts it out into the world in whatever format or context, and people can buy it or not buy it, consume it or not consume it. A designer is working based on a brief, based on a problem, based on a task. And any brief driven job is design. It is design. It is not art. It can be artful, but it is design. And that is a very, very big distinction. And I think when you talk about like academia and go through what it's like for these kids in art school or design school, like when they receive critique, everybody, I did air quotes for all of that. When they receive critique, often they do or do not accept the criticism and do what they want. That is not how the fucking world works. When you are giving criticism, when somebody is commissioning you to do design, to solve problems, to create an outcome for them, um, they are expecting you to address their feedback. They're not necessarily expecting you to address it in a specific way, but they are absolutely expecting you to consider their feedback, take it into consideration, and have the next iteration of that work have it addressed. And so I think in the education setting, moving from academia to a more professional life, there is this big realization that they didn't they're not going to like art camp. This is a real job. And, you know, there's metrics by which this stuff is being looked at, you know, and even analytics now telling you whether it's successful or not successful. So that's real stuff that we have to deal with. And then there's the professionalism wrapped around it, not just addressing the feedback, but also, you know, doing it in a way that is respectful to your peers and your clients and your supervisors and, you know, keeps things moving in a positive direction, both from an outcome and an attitude perspective.
Which one do you identify with? The artist or the designer?
I am a design.
Or both? It can be both.
I'm a designer. I solve problems all day. I do it artfully, but I'm a designer.
Okay. And when did you know, like for some people, the realization of what we want to do or who we are comes early. Sometimes it comes late. When did it happen for you?
In design school, for sure. Early in design school at Rochester Institute of Technology. I was always like very left brain, right brain. So I was always super interested in science and math and always very interested. And could draw really well and I could paint and I could, you know, I understood computers at a young age and could do layouts and like stuff like freehand and Quark Express. And so the technical aspects of design came very easily for me. And so moving then into animation and interactive while I was there felt very natural and I understood how to program. And yeah, so the technical things weren't like barriers for me in design. And I quite like that. But yeah, it was early on. I loved that I could be creative, but also would love getting assignments that was like, make a thing and this thing has to do this and you have to work with a photographer from the photography school and you have to come up with this thing together. And I was, again, like I'm not like a blank page person. I like a problem. I like a project.
Okay. It's funny that you mentioned that because when I'm from South America and when I finished secondary school, there was no real career happening in over where I was living in anything artistic. I always draw and I always was like drawn by those things, but I also had like I was very good with computers. So I studied engineering first for a couple of years, and I was miserable.
Right. Yeah.
because it was too far the other side of the spectrum.
Yep.
It was just coding and just problem solving all the time. So I connect with what you're saying. But then that's the designer side of it. But now you're a studio owner, and that's more like business mind oriented.
Yeah.
So that's another shift in the thinking of things.
Yeah.
When that happened.
Yeah, I mean that's been
and the reasons why that happened.
Yeah. So initially you start a business because you see an opportunity for me, it was a place. I wanted to be in Chicago. I didn't want to be in New York or LA. I wasn't going to work at Digital Kitchen again. I knew I didn't want to work at a post house. It's like I put all the Venn diagrams together and I had a friend who was a rep and she was like, I'll rep you, get you some work here and there. I didn't really think about it as starting a business. I felt like as like a way to do what I wanted to do, where I wanted to do it. And so I mean, it was perfectly naive, just naive enough to just take risks. And, I would say now, 15 years later, I have my arms finally pretty wrapped around it. I'm sure not wrapped around the whole thing, because that anybody that thinks they know it all knows nothing, right? that's, that's the thing you learn. Like once you realize there's more, oh God, like I didn't see this whole thing happening right before my eyes. Like you tend to be hesitant before you speak in generalities like that. But you know, running a business is so much more than the creative. And I would say that the creative, to a certain extent, becomes one of the least important things. And that you, like, I feel like I grew up the minute I accepted that. Now, that said, all of the other stuff has to be in service of the creative to create a space where that can flourish and that can be the priority and that can be the focus for other people. But for me, and a large percentage of the business, it has to do with operations. It has to do with um, finances. It has to do with business development. So, you know, creative and production makes up a slice of that, but proportionally to everything else, it is a smaller piece of the puzzle. And the second you like embrace that, you know, and understand that, you know, having a healthy financial company, having awareness from where your work is coming from and what it's looking like out there, having, you know, proper internal organizational structure from, like, we call it operations, but it's human resources, it's bookkeeping and financing and banking and like all this stuff nobody really wants to talk about. But just having all of that be in a place of security so that the creatives can do what they do and the producers do what they do is really important.
Yeah, PJ said something similar
Yeah.
um, about the structuring of laundry, about the fact that even if structuring was a process that not you don't like all the time, it certainly helped a lot to create this safe space for creativity to
Yeah.
happen. And I mentioned, do you have you read the book of Harari, Humanity?
No, I have not read that.
Okay. I mentioned this also in the other recording, so I'm going to be brief about it. But he mentions that with humans, but also like apes,
Okay.
there's this critical mass where we can reach a group until 50,
Okay.
and we don't really need a true organization like a government or like stuff like that, because we kind of like self-organize ourselves. But as soon as we go past that number, if we don't organize ourselves, like everything falls apart and those groups end up like splitting into, again, smaller groups to be able to handle themselves. And so I think, even, I don't know how many people work at Sarofsky, but all the implications you can count as people, or like interactions, or like all that number of interactions like go past that critical number. And you need to structure to be able to keep things afloat.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I think that number is probably more like 30 based on my experience. Right now, I think we're about 22, like either full-time permalance, people I consider to be full-time, even if they're not technically full-time. And then we can balloon up to, and I use the word balloon quite literally, up to 50. That's like the number of workstations that we can accommodate. And our space is 6,000 square feet. Even though there's a lot of remote, I still think about the container, the vessel is what's going to keep the size in check, and that there has to be an intentional decision on my part to become much bigger than 50, because the container itself can't fit more than 50. You know what I mean? So when I bought the building and when I set the space up, and, I was like, well, if it's more than 50, it's a different thing. It's going to be a different thing. Like, I don't know if I want that. like, again, like, my name is on the door. It's called Sarofsky. I think even if I'm not the creative lead on a job, it's one of my other creative leads. I still like to know what's going on with it and be accessible for it. Once you get over 50 people, there's just no way. If if a job comes even at 30 people, which means with freelancers you're at 40, 45 pretty consistently, that means that jobs come in and go out without me really ever seeing it. And I'm
Yeah.
like, what? Like, okay, sometimes okay. And I obviously curated my team, and if something was going on, and I don't feel that ownership in a way that some creative owners feel like it has to be an embodiment. I feel like the fact that I've curated my team and trained them means that that is a layer of having done the work that is why the name is on the door. Just that curation and training process and mentorship process is of that ilk. And it's like, the atelier system with, Da Vinci and those guys, not that I'm comparing it, but my friend Austin Shaw has this theory that the modern day studio system is akin to like that old studio system with Michelangelo. Like they were the tentpole studio head person, but then they didn't make all of this work themselves. They trained people, and they were commissioned to do the Sixteen Chapel. They didn't just go in and paint the Sixteen Chapel. It's the same fucking thing, just they were commissioned by churches because they had all the money. So it's just kind of like a different time, and you should actually have him on to talk about that. It's truly fascinating how he
You can connect me with him,
yeah, I will, for sure. It's
and we can.
really a beautiful way of kind of looking at like the evolution of that like kind of figurehead studio model. um you know so I think it's brilliant, but it's really like he can go in depth on it. I think about that all the time because I just, you can't, once you get to a certain size, you can't wrap your arms around it. If I get sick and can't go in and somebody has to pick up for me, I feel very confident that my team can do that I could be in a coma for 2 months and everything would be fine. You
Please
know what I
don't
mean?
be.
Please don't be, but I could be, and it would be okay. And I know it would be okay because, that's the crew I built, right? The question though is what do I want? What do I want it to be? And that's a bigger picture question that I think all studio owners, PJ, and all of us kind of are constantly dealing with. Some of it is what's the market? Is there work for it? Um, then if there is a boom and things are going on, is there the talent out there that can support it? I mean, through the pandemic, man, it was really hard to get people, just to
Yeah.
get artists, qualified artists. And now, God, I have superstars knocking on my door like, what do you got? I'll take anything. And it's just, the industry, and like, having been in it for over 20 years now, you see that it's a part of like the whole ecosystem of goods and services going round and around. So sometimes it's up and we're in a boom, and sometimes we're in a bust, bull and the bear.
Yeah, like well, I have a friend that has her own company, and she recently had to scale back.
Yeah.
She was doing great, and then suddenly everything flipped over.
Mm-hmm.
And she so because there's this kind of like, I think, traditional vision of what the the success of the growth should be,
Yeah.
which is, okay, you were an employee, then you become freelance, and then you form your own studio. Like, I mean, I've seen so many people buy into that.
Yeah.
And first of all, I think you've been right on the money when you say like the implications of opening a studio are heavy. The
Mm-hmm.
implications of like hiring people, like having employees and making sure that you can pay their salaries every month, that's like that takes a toll on you.
Mm-hmm.
And also, like, you were talking about scaling, and I think a lot of people don't understand that scaling is not a linear process.
Mm-hmm.
Scaling is like exponential.
Yeah.
It starts like kind of like growing like linearly,
And then it
and
goes,
then it explodes.
yeah.
And in past project I've been working closely with some CEOs
Mhm.
and of like very, very large companies.
Mhm.
And I was baffled because
Mhm.
when these guys came on the studio to shoot, they had an assistant, and the
Yeah.
assistant had like this tablet with their schedule,
Yeah.
and their schedule was like, okay, we have 30 minutes here. Then while you're in the car, we're going to have a call with this person. And when you land, we will have a 10-minute interview with this thing. And then it's, first of all, it was like the diversity of things in just one day was insane.
Mhm.
And just like the time allocation
Yeah.
was like also a lot of crazy thing. And to me, it like connects with what you were saying. Like, if I go bigger, it will be impossible for me to follow everything we do because it's not humanly possible
Just
to be
not
doing all of
possible.
it.
Yeah. And you move further from the work as I've
Yes.
grown and as the company's grown and as I've really truly accepted the responsibilities of business ownership, like operations, all that stuff. I've I've gotten further from the work, but I do know that that ultimately makes the work better. So I'm like pretty excited about that. But and I know that that's part of my transformation just as a person and understanding even more empathy for our clients and their business objectives, the more connected I am to my own business in a way. It's kind of an interesting thing. I think as creatives, we just want to be like, oh, that's the business stuff. But like now I'm like, oh, that's the business stuff. Like, give me that stuff. Like, because that will affect how we're thinking creatively. And that's who I would want to hire. Somebody that understands that there is a direct connection between those things. Um, quite literally. Yeah. Yeah. It over 50 for sure. For sure. It becomes a different thing. And I think at that point you're growing for scale to either be consumed or consume others and like fold it in. And that's when you're chasing something different as a person, as an
Yeah.
owner. You're not necessarily chasing the best work. Um, your team might be chasing the best work, but you have changed and are now chasing more businessy things and less creative things.
Yeah. Like in the past, I've worked for companies where the owners weren't at all in that business
Yeah.
because of the art. They were just like, it was like a business plan.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm not judging. It's like, I'm not saying this is
Mm-hmm.
right or wrong. I'm just saying it could have been selling soap or selling videos. It's just
Yeah.
that the niche happened to be that one, and that's the one they picked.
Yeah.
Um, do you miss being more on the design side?
No, because when I want to do it, I can. And I do. I love seeing what my team does, and I feel very much like I influence it. So I still feel connected to it. Um, yeah, when I want to get on the box and do a thing, I do a thing. But I feel like I can do more through and with other people than I can do alone, you know, kind of it's like having AI. I have all these people doing all the things I want them to do, and I get to give them feedback. And to see how they interpret that feedback lights me up in a way that is different than when I would stumble upon a solution myself, you know?
Yeah, no, like nobody has the monopoly of good ideas.
No, of course not. Yeah.
Um, Throughout these like years, um, as an artist or designer. Sorry,
Designer. Yeah.
let's
It's
not.
okay.
Uh, as a designer and now like as a business owner, um, if you had to choose one moment that really marked you, it can be good, it can be bad, it can be sad, it can be happy.
Mm.
There's no good or bad answer here. If there's one, you could only pick one. Which one would it be?
Well, I really learned a lot when I pitched community. Um, it was our first opportunity when I was just starting Sarofsky. So I was out on my own and kind of trying to do this thing. And we got a call to come in to discuss the community main title sequence. And it was the day before, and the producer was like, Joe, do you want to come in tomorrow to talk about it with us? And I'm like, absolutely. And I happened to be in LA. So he's like, okay, come to Sony lot. All the people that you need to talk to are here. And he kind of rattled off all the names. And, it was the next day. He sent over the materials. He sent over maybe a pilot and some scripts. And I did all my homework. And, LA traffic, pretty crazy. And we were at a pizza place nearby, Pizza Mozza, and me and my producer at the time, and the phone rings, and it's Jake, the producer, and he's like, "Hey, so do you have like any AV needs for your presentation?" And I'm like, "What presentation? It's a kickoff." And he goes, "Oh, okay. I'm sure this is going to go well." And I'm like, okay. And so like there's this realization that I'm heading into a meeting to give a presentation for my first ever main title sequence, without a presentation. And so I, of course, I'm not going. Of course I'm going to this presentation. That didn't even like occur to me that you could just not go or be like, oh, I'm not prepared for this. So what I did was I just took out my notebook and I just started coming up with ideas. And, to this point I had, worked at Digital Kitchen, and God, our presentations were stunning. Everything was designed. Very little writing at that time, just like if you don't see it and it's not beautiful, we'd spend weeks on these boards to present ideas. And here I am heading into my first ever pitch with a scrap of paper and like 10 bulleted ideas on it. And I'm like, okay, let's go. Let's see. So I show up, and it's the library set, and all the tables are pushed together. 6 tables are pushed together, and they sit me like right in the middle. And around the table are like Dan Harmon and the Russo brothers and all the writers and all the producers. And it's like me in the center. I just pull out this little scrap of paper, this little notebook. And I'm like, okay, let's just start going. I'll start going through my ideas. And so I remember lobbing out the first idea. And in my notebook, it just said rejection letters. I'm like, rejection letters. Okay, so imagine you send a letter to Princeton, you apply, you get the note in the mail, you're rejected. And then, SUNY New Paltz, some kind of okay college. And then down to DeVry, you're rejected from DeVry. And then eventually you get your congratulations, you've been accepted to Greendale Community College. And like, people loved it. They were like, oh, that's so fun. And I could see how it would work as a title sequence. And then one of the writers goes, yeah, but, even though all of our cast, all of our characters are rejects, this is where they come for acceptance. And this is where ultimately they're accepted. So I don't think a main title rooted in rejection is our show. And I was just like, okay, next idea. But so I go through all these ideas, and it was a masterclass, because what I learned in that moment is no matter how beautiful your design is, design with a capital D, the perfect typography, everything considered, photoreal out the wazoo, if it isn't the right thinking, if it doesn't connect with what their story is, if it isn't being filtered through the lens of the people looking at it, it doesn't matter if it's beautiful design storyboards or not, if the idea isn't there and it doesn't connect to all these different themes. And that was like an absolute masterclass for me. Eventually I got to the idea about the cootie catcher, which is ultimately what we produced. And, I like folded one up, and they were like lit up for it. It like connected to this like idea of 13th grade, the big pen, the inappropriate illustrations on it. You know what I mean? Like they all like got it. And it was tactile and it was real. And that night they were like, oh, make a board. I went home, I made a cootie catcher. I just took some pictures of it, put it in a board, and they were like, yeah, you're hired. Make that. And that was my first gig with the Russo brothers, my first main title ever as my own studio. And that took me directly, obviously, to them. They brought me to Marvel, and that Marvel connection took obviously introduced me to James, who's now, running DC and doing all sorts of amazing things, who we're still working with. And, all the producers that worked on Community, because it did have a very long run and Dan would update the title sequence a lot. They all met us, and that is like the little seed that created my career. But it also was the seed of the insight behind how I approach all of our work, which is, yes, it has to be designed with a capital D. It has to look beautiful, but there has to be a brief and a core understanding underneath it to make it work. And that's important.
Thank you for sharing
Yeah.
that memory. And I think it's really important because um, in the end, even the way you were telling me the story was also very candid. So I
Okay.
don't know how that meeting went, but I guess that some of that candid energy was also there at that
Yeah.
moment.
Yeah.
Um, and I always say, speak to people with words they understand.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a lesson I learned in South America, where there's like large societal divergence between the very poor and the very rich. And when I was a student, I worked like a couple times with people from very, very poor neighborhoods. And I quickly realized that when communicating with them, um, it wasn't up to them to get to my level, which I had better
Right.
education, and even if I was like just middle class, I had education, I was well fed, I had like another reality in which when I
Mm-hmm.
was living, it was up to me to
Yep.
get to their level because it wasn't to my capacity to do it,
Mm-hmm.
and adapt and communicate in a way they could understand it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what you just said is totally different situation, but it's the same problematic. It's
Mm-hmm.
just you manage to convey an idea in a way that got them, hello dog, um, that got them first of all excited, but also that that was in a terminology they they process and they understand. And a
Yeah.
lot of artists like kind of like miss that, like they want to be clever or they want to this, when in fact it's just dumb it down, like make it simple.
Yeah. Like, what's the insight? For them, it was about insight and their characters and you know, the thing that they've been building this whole time. They're not necessarily thinking about it through a designer's lens. They're thinking about it from a writer's lens and from people that craft characters and production design and all that stuff. So it is really healthy to have these like early conversations. And now when we have early conversations with showrunners, we do lob some ideas like that just to get a sense like yay or nay, like what's resonating, where I don't know that I ever did that before that. It was always like, okay, what is it? What's the brief? And then you then turn that into polish boards and then you share them. And now sometimes if the brief is super open, we might do an initial call where we just have like one sheets with ideas to see, because one of those ideas could be broken into like four different looks. You know what I mean? But like, is that an idea they even want to pursue? Is that something that would work for their show? Or is that something that actually like, no, avoid that because we don't want to talk about the characters in that way? And you're like, okay, super cool. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, and hmm, I, not to take anything away from your success and your craft, but I think what you beautifully put with the seed that opened up your
Yeah.
career is sometimes it's being in the right room with the with the right
Person.
people,
Yeah.
um, can radically change things.
Yeah.
And so being like you just said, is being uh, able to listen and feel, read the room if you want,
Hmm.
to use that to your advantage, to make a difference.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. Like there's listening to understand and then listening, waiting to talk. And I've really been trying to be the former, a person that listens, to not just be able to say the thing I'm waiting to say. And I think, that gets back to what we were talking about initially. If people would listen to understand where a person is coming from and not to just wait to give their opinion about it, um, the world would be different.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
Yeah.
And that's why I felt that this topic, like the ethics of our artistic corpus or design corpus, if you prefer,
Hmm.
really fitted
Yeah.
your for you.
Yeah.
Um, we are past the 1 hour mark, so
Yeah.
it's up to you if you want to land the plane slowly, or if you because you must be probably busy, or
Yeah.
if you want to keep going for a little bit more.
Well, I do. I already told people that I'm running late, so I have like another 10 minutes if you want, but I think I have to cap it at that. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. So
Yeah.
let's start to land the
The
plane kind
plane.
of like slowly.
Slow
So so
descent. Yeah.
so you don't have to rush out.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've talked about the past and the present,
Hmm.
and you also mentioned that like there's choices that are now like forking for you, and you're
Hmm.
kind of like thinking out, do I want to go there or not?
Hmm.
Um, where do you see yourself in a couple of years? And when I say yourself, it's not
Yeah.
specifically Sarofsky as a studio. It's just I'm talking about you, Erin.
Yeah. Well, I definitely think I'm in a transition point in my own personal career, both within the studio and out in the community. I think I'm starting to find my voice in a really unique way, and I'm thinking about like really what our true point of difference is in the studio, not just as like, oh, we're more than a motion design studio. We do have like some core philosophies even related to that story I just told you about how we tackle projects so differently, and we're such deeper thinkers than I would say a traditional production company that's just like hired to make the thing. I think I want to get involved a lot earlier in projects, and so I see myself out in the world more, talking more, putting our philosophy out there more, and doing things more like we talked about initially, where I'm giving my point of view on things. And sometimes that'll be, from a design perspective or a storytelling perspective, or just like, hey, chill, everybody. Let's like wait and see where this evolves to. Um, so to become a little bit more of a present voice in our community.
Yeah, like these recordings and the style I'm trying to uh, influx in them,
Hmm.
it's because I think there's like an overload of stuff that we've already seen,
Hmm.
and I really want to see like not only juniors but even like people that are like at the mid of their career or even like
Yeah.
on the late part of their career to kind of like see the behind the scenes and also get to know like the real like what the people are the people are
Yeah.
behind the personas, because people see you online
Hmm.
or see PJ or other people or that succeeded. I'm just putting
Yeah.
like
Air
this.
quotes. Yeah.
Um, and then there's this whole like I think misconception that happens, and
Hmm.
that creates imposter syndrome and puts pressure on people when in fact like there's not one path to get where you want to
Hmm.
be. I think it's important to like go inside of yourself also and have those deep thoughts of like, where do I really want to be? Like, and okay, I want to be there. What do I have to do to get there? Who do I have to talk to? Like, how, and then know that these things take time.
Well, that's the key, right? That's the time factor. I think one of the things I've noticed over the last, say, 6, 8 years is this kind of, so So like talent gets you in the door. Talent gets you in at a studio like Laundry or Sarofsky. But experience and time is what elevates you. And so the talent is a necessary thing for you to even be in the mix. Like you're not getting in a place if you're not talented. You're not staying in a place if you're not professional and have social awareness and can work in function in a team environment. But really, the time factor is completely wackadoo now. People think they come in, junior designer, you're out of school, 2 years out of school. Hey, I'm super talented. I'm working on all these projects. I should be a senior designer. And it's like, you're talented, but you'll be a senior designer when you're 10 years in, you know, because a senior designer is responsible for more. And the only way you could possibly take on that level of responsibility is if you've done it for that long and have been put in that many scenarios and have shown time after time again that you are going to come through and solve problems and be professional. And that's a time thing. That is not a talent thing. And so, as an industry, we've really promoted talent before experience and time. And I think it's really catching up with us. So,
I always joke when I see the people online that are like, and again, this is not good or bad, but like they're 23,
yeah,
25, and they're like, I cracked the code of life and let me teach you how. And I'm like, dude, you're 25. Like,
yeah,
and again, and they might have incredible insight on stuff
great
from their
instincts. Yeah.
generation that completely goes under the radar to me. And I'm totally open to get that in. But it's pretty bold for you to say when you're kind of like not even at the quarter of your life,
Yeah.
saying, I'm going to teach you how you should be doing things. And I think it's kind of like the same mentality,
Mm-hmm.
what you're saying here.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
and I can clearly see myself when I was younger now and
Mm-hmm.
go like, yeah, I mean, we've come a long way. And
Mm-hmm.
and the way I react nowadays to a lot of things is way more calm and
Calm.
serene,
Yeah.
and taking it in and taking the time to analyze it and not just like react to it.
Mm-hmm.
It's just take time to absorb it, go through it. It's like, okay, what now, how do I respond to this? What are my
Mm-hmm.
options? Which one is the best one for the best outcome? My mission is
Yeah.
to go to point A to point B. So should I go to war and like and fight 100 walls into my way to get to point B, or should I start like being like
Yeah.
like
Yeah. I mean, the real question is how do we slow things down while still moving fast? You know, because everything is moving fast around us. Our projects are moving fast. The needs are moving fast. The young kids are feeling the speed at which things are consumed and irrelevant. And we didn't have that. Things were consumed a lot slower, and so to a certain extent, I feel like they're aging faster. But the truth is you know that awareness is only going to come with time, as it did for us. Um, but the difference is like I think the generation before us was much more um, revered and respected, probably than I think we're in a situation now where people have been through an academic system which coddled and didn't really expose people to things that made them uncomfortable or were different than what their opinions were. They didn't push the other point of view. And I think, I think that it's probably a little bit real, but I think, if you read a book called Coddling of the American Mind, I mean, I definitely use the word coddle because of I read that book and I really resonated with it. But I do think there's a shift and a shift of fear from leaders to push back and to even educate on counter points of view. Um, yeah, and nuance. nuance of points of view. You can be both right and wrong in a single moment, depending on anything. You
And
know, there has to be
you
an
can agree
open-mindedness to
you
it.
can agree to disagree also, because
Yes,
I have friends which we have like diametrically opposite opinions on some topics, but that doesn't make us enemies.
correct.
I can listen to what they're saying and go like, huh, I hadn't seen it that way, even if I don't agree,
Yeah,
and then listen to mine, and you know, like to kind of like close what you just said, which kind of is a paradox. So like going slower and going faster at the same time.
hmm,
I can see it with my daughter.
yep,
Like you said, they on some aspects they're growing older faster.
hmm,
They get exposed to some things way faster than we are.
we were.
We were, sorry, but at the same time, she still has the maturity of the age that she
She
has,
is. Yes.
and those things like sometimes are completely disconnected, and and I can see that even she's like sometimes struggling.
Hmm.
And that applies to us also as
Of
creatives,
course.
designers, artists, whoever you want to be.
Yeah.
Um, Erin, thank you very much
Thank you.
for being with me,
My
and for
pleasure.
spending this time and for all this lovely conversation.
It's been a privilege.
Um,
Thank you.
is there anything else you want to say before saying goodbye?
No, but if I think of something, I'll record it and send it to you. Or we can jump
Okay,
back in.
all right.
Great.
Thank you very much, Erin.
Thank you.